Hello and welcome to Program Debugging, part of the Python tutorial series that's also available on this channel. Now, Program Debugging is an idea for a series that I've had for a while, and I'm pretty excited to get it started. Now, over the course of running the Python tutorial series, it's happened a few times, but people post their code to the comments and would like some help debugging their programs. And I think that's great because that's what the channel is here to do, help people work through some of these programming challenges and become better programmers. But a lot of the times when I'm responding to offer advice to a lot of the viewers, I find myself wondering whether or not I'm explaining everything correctly, because sometimes it's a really difficult thing to do program debugging through explanation. A lot of times you got to see it. When I was a new programmer, I used to go to sites like Stack Overflow a lot, and I would find that the explanations I got were no doubt useful, but I didn't always understand them. They didn't always directly apply to me, and sometimes it just seemed like the advice I was getting wasn't helping because I didn't understand what was wrong still. So the Program Debugging Series here will take some of the code that has been posted during the series and show you how I go through the process of debugging, some of the steps that I take, and in the end we'll get those broken bits of code working. So I'm excited to get started, so let's go ahead and start with the first in the Program Debugging series, which is part of the Python tutorial series. So for our first program to debug here, we're going to come from lesson number 14, which was the nested function lesson. And the challenge program in lesson 14 was to create a menu where a user could select a battle axe, a longsword, a dagger, and a polearm, and then the program would intelligently be able to respond and know what the user picked. And in the comments, this was the bit of code that was printed. And let's go through and debug it and see if we can figure out what's wrong and what we need to do to get it working. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm trying to debug a program is simply run it and see what happens. When I teach students in the actual classroom, that's the easiest way to get a handle on what's going on in this program. So let's start by pressing F5 and running this program. The first error that I get is expected an indented block. Now, where this is coming from is I've got a while statement right here. The while statement is expecting some kind of block, and this if statement right here is not indented over. So the while statement isn't recognizing that these if checks are supposed to be checked while we're in this loop. So the first thing let's do is highlight all of this stuff right here and tab it over. Can't figure out, it's not tabbing over like it normally does, so let's just do this manually. So we'll move everything over, and that should take care of the first problem. Now that we've identified that, let's go ahead and run this program again. I'm getting another expected indented block. The reason I'm getting this error is because now we look at this if statement. This if statement is checking to see if weapon equals question mark. Python is expecting an indented block of code to evaluate, and right now the next line is flush with our last if statement. One easy way that you can kind of bypass this error, at least for the time being, we'll have to come back to it and give it some functionality, but I'm going to use the pass keyword. Pass is a keyword that Python will recognize as do nothing. We'll come back to that. So Python knows there's a block of code there, but as of right now, absolutely no instructions are being given. So we're going to tell Python to pass here. That way we're not getting the expected indented block error anymore. With that one handled, we'll hit F5 to run the program again. And I'm not getting any serious errors right now, so it says, would I like to continue? And we hit Y, and the program ends. If I hit N, the program ends. So at least we got the real sinister errors that were stopping our program from running out of the way. Now we have to go through this code and figure out how to make it work like the challenge program. Going back over to our programming window, I can see that we've defined 3 functions. We've got 1 function, 2 functions, and 3. And then we have an input statement that sets a variable equal to this variable cont, which stands for continue. Well, one thing that we're running into right now is while the functions have been defined, they're not being called throughout the running of this program. So we're going to change that so that we call these functions in some sort of order. One little change that I'm going to make as well that will help me out quite a bit is to rename these functions so that they're a little more descriptive of what they do. When I look at this function right here, I can see it's printing some sort of welcome message. I'm going to rename this function print welcome. There is one parameter in here right now, but since we're simply printing a message, we don't need any sort of information for our program to print this message, so I'm going to remove that argument. Because this print welcome function is only there to print a welcome message, it doesn't need a return value at all. It's simply there to display information to the screen, so I'm going to get rid of this return statement. Now, at the bottom of my program, I'm going to run print welcome, which should call this function right here that will print the appropriate welcome message. Let's hit F5 and see if we've made some progress. Fantastic. We're printing the welcome message appropriately now, and you can see continuing still doesn't work, but we're on our way there. So we now have a function that prints the welcome screen. Now this next function right here, when I look at it, appears to be a weapon menu. It's a weapon selection screen. It's really similar to print welcome in that it's not necessarily taking any information from the user, it's simply displaying some information for the user to work with. So I'm going to start by renaming these, and I'm going to call this one weapon menu. And because, just like print welcome, this is only displaying information and not asking the user for input, that's what this function down here is going to do. Since this is simply a printing function, we don't need any arguments in this one either. So we'll have weapon menu as our function, and it prints the weapon selection perfectly fine. Because the only job of this function is to print information, we don't need a return statement here either. We really only need this if we're doing something other than simply printing. Just to kind of help me along as well, I'm going to add comments to these functions so that I remember what they are in the future. So I'm going to add a comment to this print welcome function that says prints a welcome message when the game starts. And the comment for weapon menu will be to display a list of weapon choices to the user. As my program gets to start a little bit bigger, as this program grows, it might be helpful to remember exactly why we made these functions. Just like we did with print welcome, let's test the weapon menu out really quick. So now that we've cleaned up this function a little bit, we need to call it in the body of our program. So let's say weapon menu. Now this is being called, and we'll run our program. And it appears like it's working correctly. We've got our welcome message now, and we've got our weapon selection screen, and it's asking if we'd like to continue, which of course still doesn't work. But at least now we have a menu for our user to look at. We're going to be using the contents of this weapons menu in this function right here, where this is where we're going to get the actual input from our user. So let's start with this definition. I'm going to rename this so it's a little bit more descriptive of the function of this function as well. And I'm going to call this select weapon. There are no arguments here, and that's good. This function will return a value. It will return what weapon the user selected, but because that's being done with an input statement, we don't need to pass any arguments into this function. So this function will get input from the user on their weapon of choice. So we're going along pretty good here. Now we have a weapon variable that is going to be set to an input statement. Select the weapon you would like to use, press question mark for help. Fantastic. Now let's add this to our function call and call this select weapon function. Hit F5. And now we're getting the select the weapon you would like to use option here. And I'm going to select B for battle axe. And I can see I'm thrown into this endless loop now. The user selects battle axe, but it never breaks out of this while loop here. So that might be the next bug that we have to address. The way that I'm going to address this is by adding a return statement to this if check. If the user has selected battle axe, I'm going to return some sort of value. Now, I think I'm going to return the string of capital B to represent battle axe. Now, this could be anything that you want. It could be the whole word battle axe. It could be a number that represents battle axe. It's whatever your program in the future is going to use to represent the battle axe, that's what you want to return here. Since the user inputted B, I'm just going to return B. Now, when I do that and run this program again, selecting battle axe should work correctly now, and it does. The user pressed B for battle axe, and the adventurer chooses to wield a battle axe, and then it asks if I'd like to continue. We still haven't addressed continue. I'm going to repeat this process for each of the user selections. So we're going to return a capital L for longsword. We're going to return a capital D for dagger. We'll come back to this question mark here in a second. And we will return a P if the user selects polearm. Remember that a return statement will cause this loop to break. So we don't necessarily need to have that break statement because we're going to eventually run into a return statement. Because we're using a return statement now, we want to store what the user has selected somewhere. So down here, when I call select weapon right now, these return values are simply being lost. In order to store the user's weapon selection for future use, I need to save that value in a variable. So I'm going to initialize a weapon variable and have it equal to the select weapon function. Weapon as a global variable will now store either a B, an L, a D, or a P. Now that seems to be something we're doing here, but remember, since this weapon variable here is part of the select weapon function, this is a local variable. As soon as we encounter a return statement, this variable right here goes away. It doesn't exist outside of this function. So if we're going to save our user's input, we need to save it in a global variable that's initialized and stored outside of this function right here. Let's do a quick check here of how this program is working right now. So I've got the weapon menu, and I'm going to select B for battle axe. I know continue isn't working now, so let's check the weapon variable real quick. Weapon equals B, which is also what I selected off my menu here, and that coincides with the return value of this check right here. If we check this again with a polearm, let's hit P for polearm. We get the appropriate message. The adventurer has chosen to wield a polearm. And if I check weapon now, I can see that weapon equals P. So right now, we're in good shape with these return statements. The next thing that I want to address in this program to get it to run more efficiently is what happens if the user enters a question mark. Right now, if the user enters a question mark, we'd have a pretty bad error in our program. The user hits question mark, nothing happens, and I can't break out of this loop right here. The reason is weapon equals question mark, so we're told to pass. It runs back up here, this while loop doesn't break, but nowhere in this while statement am I given the opportunity to change weapon. So I'm in a constant loop right now, while this while statement will continually check to see what weapon is equal. It will always find it equal to question mark, and then it will always pass. So what we need to do is fix this really quickly, because this is a bad error that a lot of times you can't even control break out of. So let's make sure, let's run this again real quick to throw it out of its loop and get that question mark working. Now this one right here is a real easy fix because we have a weapon menu right here that is set to display all the choices the user has. So if the user's forgotten the choices that they have, we'll have weapon menu as a function run. Now, because the user isn't, we're not returning a value here, the user hasn't made a selection right here, would still be in an endless loop. If I were to run this right here and hit question mark, you'll see that we're constantly reprinting that menu. And the reason is we're still not given an opportunity to change what weapon is equal to. The best way to fix that would be to move this input statement here into the while loop. So let's go ahead and move that into the while loop there, which will now give us a bit of an error if we run this program. Because if, whoops, sorry, I moved that weapon over there just a little bit too far. If I run this program now, I'm getting a local variable weapon referenced before assignment. That's because I'm checking the value of weapon there. Oops. I'm checking the value of weapon here, but I haven't actually initialized it to a value yet because we're not giving weapon a value until this input statement. To get around that, I'm going to initialize weapon to be the empty string right now. To start off, this will be equal to nothing. That will allow this while loop to run, and then we can change weapon to whatever the user wants afterwards. So we'll run this program now. Things seem to be working okay. Let's hit question mark. When I hit question mark, you can see that weapon selection displayed again, and every time I hit question mark, it displays. And it will continue to display until I select a valid choice, in this case, the dagger. When I hit D for dagger, this gets printed correctly, and if I check weapon, weapon is equal to D, which is the return value for dagger. Now the last thing that I want to do in this program is throw it into an endless loop. I should note that this while statement right here isn't doing a whole heck of a lot. We can't get rid of it, but we could change it to a number of different things. This right here, from a syntax standpoint, is not doing a useful thing. It's not really doing a good job. We're going to leave this because it's not affecting our program, but know that if you got into a much bigger program, we might run into some problems with this code right here, but it's not going to impact us too much right now. The last thing that we do want to do is have this program run in a loop until the user doesn't want to continue. So right now we're calling the welcome function, the weapon menu, and the weapon selection once. Let's put that in a loop. So while continue is equal to y, we want to run this loop over and over and over. So as long as continue equals y, or the user keeps entering in uppercase Y, we want this to run. Since this is now a block of code, we'll move our welcome, our weapon menu, and our weapon select over, as long as this, and as well as this question at the end of the loop. This will cause an error right now if we leave it as is. You can see we get continues not defined. That's because the first time we initialize the variable continue isn't until after we're making a check. So we'll initialize continue to an initial value of y. By doing so, this while loop will run the first time, and then afterwards, continue will always be equal to user input. So let's run this program now. We can see we get the weapon selection screen. I'm going to select Battle Axe. I get the appropriate message, and I'm going to tell the program I would like to continue. And so I get the menu again. Let's select Longsword. That message worked correctly. Let's select a dagger. I get that message. I hit yes one more time. Select polearm. So all four of my messages on my menu are working. Would I like to continue? No. And my program breaks correctly. And that's it. That is video number 1 in the Program Debugging series on this channel. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or comments on this first video, or if you can think of any ways to help improve it, please let me know by leaving those comments. I definitely read them all, and the goal for this channel is to make it as useful as possible for as many people as possible. For every one question that's out there, there's probably 20 or 30 people that are having a similar experience that maybe just haven't asked the question yet. So hopefully this series will help a lot of beginning programmers debug. You can see from doing this one right here, there were a lot of little bugs to work through, and that can be very overwhelming when your program isn't working and you don't know where to start to try and get it working, to try and get it running again. It can be a little bit frustrating. So just go through your programs if you're struggling, and just one bug at a time, and solve them one by one until you get everything running. If you find you struggle with that, post your code to the comments, and we can do a program debugging video for your particular bit of code. So if you've seen a video that maybe you're struggling with, or something that you had tried and didn't have a lot of success with, go ahead and post the code that you're having problems with to the comments, and we can get it working together as part of the Program Debugging Series. As always, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on the series. We'll be back in probably about a day with a new programming video, and have a great day.